Okay, so for our last topic of today, yes, we are going to talk about climate change, but no, I'm not going to bore you with all that science nonsense. We're going to talk about the impacts of climate change on the housing market and the insurance industry. There's a great article by a local newspaper. We're here in South Florida, so I thought that would be relevant. As always, I'll leave the link in the description below to the full article so you guys can read it for yourselves. A report from international consulting giant McKinsey, released on Thursday, found that Florida homes subject to the risk of flooding could lose 5 to 15% of their value in the next decade, barring any significant changes to the market in that time. By 2050, that could leap to 15 to 35%, which is wild. In another Miami-Dade focused report from Jupiter Intelligence, researchers found that moderate flooding of about a foot will affect nearly double the numbers of homes by 2050. In other words, by the year of 2050, not only will double the number of houses be affected by moderate flooding, but that houses that have even subject to the risk of flooding could lose 15 to 35% of their value, which is insane to me. The reports tackle a relatively new topic in the financial world, which is beyond me, as scientists have been talking about climate change for decades at this point, one with big implications for residents in the most vulnerable state in the nation. It's called climate risk, which I'm glad it has its own term now, and it explains all the ways that the warming world will mess with global financial systems. In McKinsey's report, Florida was the case study for climate's impacts on the real estate market. The question that we ask is, if you look at this ecosystem that exists around real estate now, what happens if you throw in a changing climate? It starts to expose all these vulnerabilities inherent in the system, said Michaela Krishnan, a senior fellow at the McKinsey Global Institute and co-author of the report. It's hard to know how any of these systems will play out. For one, the insurance market will have to adapt to the actual cost of insuring properties that now face a much higher likelihood of floods or stronger hurricanes. That means higher premiums for flood and windstorm insurance, or in my opinion, if it starts getting too bad, they may not even offer it anymore, as it may cost too much to insure properties. Mortgages may be more expensive to get once banks realize that a home facing the literal prospect of going underwater isn't a sound investment. The repeated floods or storms could make buyers, both global mega investors and regular single-family homeowners, shy away from more vulnerable properties, dropping the value further, and this will essentially set off a domino effect. Property values and the taxes associated with buying and selling real estate make up a sizable chunk of state and local budgets. That means these municipalities tasked with protecting their residents from more extreme events will have less money to do so. Some speculators liken the coming market shift as climate change affects real estate to the mortgage crisis from a decade ago. That's crazy. On Tuesday, the CEO of $7 trillion asset management company BlackRock said the coming upheaval is bigger than the financial crisis. So you know, when the CEO of a $7 trillion company is telling you that this is going to be bigger than the financial crisis, you know that this is huge. Principle for Responsible Investment, a UN-supported group with more than 500 global asset managers as members, warned of a response by 2025. So this to me means that they have to have a response ready by 2025. That's only 5 years from now. We could start seeing the retreat of communities after shock events. We need to think about it because it's going to be a slow process and we're starting it now, said Nidia Martinez, Director of Climate Risk Analytics at global risk management and insurance firm Willis Towers Watson. It's another sobering report for residents of South Florida, a region consistently pointed to as ground zero for the worst effects of climate change. Great. Parts of South Florida are going to be fine, and parts of South Florida are doomed regardless of infrastructure, and in some places, infrastructure will make a big difference, Sorkin said. Another impact to be factored in: rising insurance premiums as companies adjust their rates to account for sea level rise. The National Flood Insurance Program, of which Florida holds 35% of all policies, is redesigning its rates to better reflect risk in 2021, in a process called Risk Rating 2.0. There's always a price, unless you're underwater, of course, but you really don't want to get there, Martinez said. Her Willis Towers Watson colleague, Senior Director of Disaster Risk Financing Simone Young, is presenting a panel on climate risk at the Florida Insurance Summit on Thursday. It's the first time the topic has been the subject of a panel discussion at the annual conference. The main focus is on how to get premium prices, which are held down by state statute, high enough to account for real risk. He predicts lawmakers will stop supporting the artificially low prices once flooding gets more common. The alarm bells are starting to go off where they need to, he said. So these insurance companies and risk management companies are starting to realize this is an issue. Krishnan said the same thing applies to hurricane insurance. The models don't include the latest science that shows climate change is making hurricanes more intense. Anyone who's relying on their insurance for a proxy for risk 10 to 20 years out is just standing on sand, said Sorkin. Standing on sand on top of water. Jupiter's analysis also showed that the expected losses on mortgages in Miami-Dade County could go from 1.24% in 2019 to 1.9% in 2050. Those numbers may seem tiny, but Sorkin said they represent a potentially big shift for home buyers. The higher that number is, the more a bank will charge for interest on a mortgage. So how can South Florida avoid a financial crisis from climate risk? The experts all pointed to the same thing. Invest in resilient infrastructure, built better and stronger, slowly raise the rates for insurance, stop developing in risky areas, which I have yet seen, and get all residents on board for the changes that have to take place. Unless a high percentage of voters make this their top priority, it's very hard for cities, counties, and the country to get the money they need to spend to combat this, Sorkin said. The larger scale solution is to slow down the physical effects of climate change by pumping fewer emissions into the atmosphere. That will lessen the longer term impacts of climate change, but will do little for the next few years. Scientists say the immediate environmental changes are baked into the system, a belated response to decades of climate pollution. To remove the further buildup of risk beyond what is already locked in, there is this imperative to put fewer emissions into the atmosphere over time, said Dickon Pinner, the global leader of McKinsey's sustainability practice and co-author of the report.
What can be done to promote designs and planning that can stand for the long term, that can withstand the impacts of the onslaught of changes that we're expecting as we see warmer temperatures and rising seas?
You know, this isn't true of every city, but certainly in the city of Boston, we're lucky to have a mayor who's focused on this and put together a climate action plan. But I also think that the marketplace is starting to recognize this, whether it's investors that are coming along with developers like ourselves. I'll give you a great example is Norges out of Norway. Very, very focused on climate resiliency and sustainability. It's a thesis of their investment and every investment they make. We talk about these things with them constantly. But it's also our clients. Our clients are starting to focus on it as well. I wouldn't say in huge numbers yet. We're in the early innings, but the clients are starting to go there, which is your ultimate customer, the tenants in the building. There's a friend of mine, Spencer Glendon, who I think is just the foremost climate economist, and he's a senior fellow at Woods Hole. He has really enlightened me a lot on focusing on what's going to happen in insurance, because that's the telltale sign of all investment for real estate. And he has a great phrase, which he says, if it happens once every 100 years, it's insurable. And if it happens twice every 50 years, it's expensive, but insurable. If it happens once every 20 years, it's called equity, meaning you're not going to be able to insure it. And if you can't insure, you're not going to be able to get that. And therefore, everything, the value system will change drastically. So that's an area that I'm focused on in for the future of how does this correct? And maybe it'll be self-correcting because of events, and you won't be able to flip.
That was Brian Koop at Harvard Business School giving his 2 cents. Link to the full discussion in the description below. So there you have it. Climate change is now being factored into the real estate market and the insurance industry. Investors who stand to lose are becoming more aware of the impacts of climate change. Whether you believe the scientists who have been talking about this for decades now are saying that this is going to be an issue, Clearly, the investors who are just looking to protect their own money are taking this seriously. If that's what it takes for people to open their eyes, so be it. People need to start realizing that their investments are literally going to go under if this issue isn't addressed. Keep in mind the financial industries are just now starting to wake up to the significant economic impact of climate change. When the general public starts to realize their homes aren't going to be worth anything in the coming decades, we are looking at a situation that is going to cause a massive economic depression if it's not handled properly. People are going to lose their homes and possibly their life savings, as property is an investment. For the middle class, most people's wealth is tied to their property. I would go even further and say the government needs to have a plan in place to bail out homeowners whose properties are affected by climate change. This should not be like the Obama Wall Street bailout, where the benefits went to the rich and powerful. Regular people need to be protected. This is personal to me, as my family collectively owns 4 homes, and it's often hard to bring up the conversation of protecting our future. If the liberal brainwashed scientists aren't getting through, how about financial investors? How about the CEO of a $7 trillion asset management company? Are they in on the Chinese hoax of climate change too?
The issue of global warming has been politicized. I think that there are a substantial number of scientists who have manipulated data so that they will have dollars rolling into their projects.
As we know, the IPCC is a political institution, not really a scientific one. So it uses the science for its own ends.
I wish you could go to Greenland, watch these huge chunks of ice just falling into the ocean, raising the sea levels.
And you don't know whether or not that would have happened with or without man. You don't know.
Well, you're scientists at
No,
NOAA
we have
and NASA.
scientists that disagree with that.
So Obama's talking about all of this with the global warming and that, and a lot of it's a hoax. It's a hoax. I mean, it's a money-making industry, okay? It's a hoax.
The president has tweeted climate change skepticism at least 115 times, including a claim that the concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese.
It's very clear what we have to do. And by the way, I mean, let's be very honest about this. You know, I got 7 grandchildren who I love very much. What we are fighting for from a moral perspective is the right for those kids and our grandchildren to live in a world which is healthy and inhabitable. That is a moral responsibility that we have. And here's my nightmare. My nightmare is that 30, 40, 50 years from now, some of your grandchildren or great-grandchildren will look up and they'll say, why didn't they listen to the scientific community? They were told what was going to happen. Why didn't they do something? Why did they leave us a planet which is so unhealthy and so uninhabitable? Why did they allow more drought to take place, more flooding to take place? Why did they allow the sea levels to continue to rise, flooding coastal communities? Why did they allow for the acidification of the ocean and the huge impact that has on people's ability to eat food from the ocean? Why didn't they not listen to the CIA, who have told us very clearly that when there is less food to be grown because land is now overridden with drought, less water to be had, that people are going to migrate. And when people migrate, it causes international conflict and war. That's the future that will take place if we do not have the courage to transform our energy system.